Howdy, everyone. I appreciate all y'all doing the subscribing, liking, and commenting and letting me know what it is that we need to cover and some stuff that we may need to rehash. I really do appreciate that. And in this one, we're going to be covering the introduction of Packet Tracer and how it can be utilized to be able to help us get some of those basic networking skills down and also kind of map out some stuff that we want to do later on, let's say like with Wireshark, because we're going to start bringing those two together here pretty shortly. So we're going to swap over to our installation screen and we're going to kind of go through it step by step as far as the installation of Packet Tracer. I'm not really going to go through the download portion of this because Cisco already has plenty of stuff on their website that can be looked up, and also here on the YouTube for that as well. Now, what I will say about the actual Packet Tracer installation, you'll notice here I have 3 files. And they're made for different types of operating systems. Now, the one that we're using in this one is going to obviously be the Windows. And if we take a look at the other 2 files, we have a Debian installation package and a DMG file, which is for Mac OS. So if we wanted to later on, we can actually put this on our Kali VirtualBox that we've covered in the last couple of videos and start moving forward into actually doing this on Mac if we wanted to as well. So I just wanted to put that out there real quick, that it's not just a one operating system thing. It's really kind of a one size fits all based on the operating system and package that we select. And then once we actually double click or start the installation of whichever one it is that we're going through, we'll get the do we want to agree to the licensing. Now, I'm not telling you to breeze through this, but I've already read it, so keep that in mind. And then wherever it is that we want to install it, and then what it's going to look like in the start menu when we actually hit our start button, or if we have a desktop shortcut. Now, for the most part, this is a pretty simplistic installation. It's not until we actually get into the program itself that we start to see that we can have a whole lot of options inside of our networking future. Now, I skipped through the actual loading and probably took about 2 minutes on this individual system. We're going to click finish and go ahead and start it up. And give me 1 second. I am going to resize this. And do we want to run this as multi-user when application starts? I'm going to select yes because that's the default. But if you're on a single system that only has 1 user on the system altogether, it's no real need to worry about it. Now, I do want to point out that when you first start it up, you're going to have 2 login options. And for us, we're using the Cisco Networking Academy. And this is what we run all the students through inside of the Cybersecurity and Networking Program at Panola College. So we're going to select that, and I'm going to go through and put in my login credentials. Give me 1 second. And so once it's actually open and you've logged in and everything like that, now this is kind of a compressed view because we're taking a look at this from what I can actually do inside of the OBS recording. But we start out with a blank slate and we can start dragging in anything that we really want to do. Now, zoomed in here on the bottom, we can see that there are plenty of different router switches and different kind of connections that we can actually use in making our own diagram and network layout. So we're just going to start very simple. We're going to drag in a 4331. We're going to go to our connections link down here at the bottom. And we're just, if you browse over them, you can see that they represent different types of different connections. So the lightning bolt is automatic choosing. So if we connect it to a fast ether port on the router to a fast Ethernet port on the actual device that's connected to it, it will try to automatically select Ethernet, or something like copper or something like that. So, but since I personally do not like the automatic choosing on here, and sometimes I want to slow things down and bottleneck it for experimental purposes, I just make sure that the solid black line is a copper straight through connection. So you could drag it up. Now, I don't have anything else on here other than this actual device itself. And if you double click on the device, you could see the actual, what it would look like physically on the back of it, modules and all this other stuff, which we'll get into way later on. We're just doing a default look at the device. So we're going to go back to our devices and drag another 43. Actually, let's back up for a second and add a switch in there. And we're going to put in a 2960 switch. Now, I'm going to explain why here in a second we're going to do this switch in the way we are. We're going to go to our connections and drag a solid straight through copper. Just select it, and we can see that we have the little connection thing. We're going to connect it to gig 000. Let me zoom in on that so you have a better view of it. And we just clicked on it. Oops, sorry. Clicked on it again, and we're going to drag it over to that switch. And now we're going to select whichever port on that physical switch that we want to plug it into. Gig 01 is going to be for this particular assignment. Now you'll notice that it has 2 down arrows, and that connection is down because we actually have to go into the actual router itself. We click on it again, and we can see that the switch or the router is not on. And we can also go into it and see that, oh, my bad, it was on, but it's not configured, which is okay. You'll see down here at the bottom that we have the actual terminal window for it, and that's what's actually being seen as in the actual what's going on with the actual router right now. We want to go to the CLI window, which is actually similar to putting in a terminal connection to it for console. And if we hit enter in there, we can see that it brings us back up to the actual basic prompt of the router. Now we can practice different things in here. We can practice ROM-mon recovery. We can practice bringing in imported configs, all different sorts of things. But all we're going to do here in this particular router is go into the enable prompt, not even set a password on it. We're going to do a show IPINTBR, show IP interface brief. Just gives us a quick summary of what's actually going on the interfaces that are on this device. And if we remember, we plugged in that copper to gig 000. Now, by default, some of these are shut down. So we're going to say config, oh, my bad, I need to learn how to type better. Config T, INT, G000, and we're in the interface of that actual port. And we're just going to do a simplistic no shut. And we automatically get the response that the line protocol has been changed to up. So it's not going to go up yet because the actual switch itself may be off. But you can verify that by moving this down a little bit and seeing that one side is green and the other side is orange because it's just trying to figure out what's actually going on. So we're going to hit enter again, make sure we're back at our config prompt. We're not going to do any kind of saving on this because this is a just quick demonstration. Now we're going to go into our switch and you can see that the other arrow just came up. So by default, we've just learned in Packet Tracer that a 2960 switch by default has the ports on. And we can see that because in our CLI for that switch, we have the basic press return to get started and gig 01 just changed to up. So that's good information to keep in mind as we start going through Packet Tracer a little bit more and more into actual detailed explanations of how CCNA works on some of these examples. But the reason that I wanted to bring us in here, and this is where we're going to start tying everything into Wireshark, I wanted to kind of go through a detailed look at how Session Monitor works. Now, let's go back and take a physical look at what this actual switch is for us. We know that gig 01, let's zoom in a little bit and try to move over. So almost all the way to the right, port 1, where my mouse is, that's the connection that's going straight to the router. And we're going to assume that the router in this demonstration is our perimeter to the outside internet. This switch has been put in place in order to be able to be a buffer to where we can capture packets from everything on the inside of our network or that output to the perimeter. So if we have a big enough network and we have different in and outs to our network, say a primary connection, a secondary connection, or an alternate connection for another site, we put a switch right in the middle of that before it heads out all the way, so that way we can do what's called Session Monitor. Now, everything else on this switch can be sent to wherever. Idealistically, I think I got that right. What I generally do is just use the port 1 and port 2 on the switch right here because I don't want anything else really processing on it. So I'll send the VLAN database to this switch right here based off the sub interfaces of our router, which we will get into way later on in one of the upcoming videos. I just wanted to do a quick demonstration of how Session Monitor works and give a visual to it. So port 2 on this far right diagram of the 2960 switch would go to the rest of the network, either internal routers, internal switches, however we have everything split up. Now inside of our actual CLI right here, we can press enter, go to enable mode, which is EN or enable all the way spelled out. And we can see if we do a show run, there's absolutely nothing configured in this switch. So nothing up my sleeves, if you will. And we're going to be telling the switch to send all traffic that it sees on this actual switch over to this one particular port. And if we go all the way down, we can see that the port we're going to send everything to, which we know in advance, is going to be gig 01. Now, in my demonstration, my example, everything else is coming from gig 02 in and out. I'm just putting a listener in the middle of that traffic. Let's take a look at this on the diagram and see what we're talking about. So I'm going to close this because we don't really need it. And we can see that we have our router. Sorry about that. We'll zoom it. Oh, there's a lot of zoom in on this and it goes quick. So the router on the left is our, let's say, ISP modem for our house. And then the switch on the right would be a switch we've put in place to be able to capture everything for session monitor. Well, what would go on the backside of that monitor or on the backside of that switch? Well, that's where we come down to end devices on the bottom left corner of the actual Cisco packet tracer. And we can bring in a PC, we can bring in a laptop, and we can bring in a server, and we can bring in, let's say, a VoIP device, just a device in general, whatever it is, even, let's say, like our gaming devices, because we know that they required internet connection for some games. And I'm going to select copper straight through, or it could be wireless or however we want to set that up. But for this demo, we're going to do copper. And I'm going to connect from the server over, it's one port that it gives us an option for. I'm going to go down to our switch and say 01. And I'm going to do the same thing for the rest of these devices for their Ethernet connection to that switch. And then I'm going to go to the laptop, go to my switch, and just start filling in the first 4 or 5 fast Ethernet ports on that switch. Now, if we go back into the CLI of the actual switch itself, we can see that those devices or those ports on that switch have gone up. And we also know that by default, VLAN 1 is everything on that switch. We can assign different VLANs later on. We can split them up, determine what traffic, what subnets, and everything like that goes over those different ports and VLANs. But for now, we're just leaving everything VLAN 1. Now, let's close out the CSI and take another look at our diagram here. So the router on the far left is going to represent the modem that we have in our home that also acts as a layer 3 device, a router. And the switch is something that we just put in the middle to be able to say, you know what, we want to have a ability in our own home to be able to session monitor traffic going in and out over tools such as Wireshark. Now, we have these 4 devices that are representing devices that are in our home. They could be gaming, they could be phones, they could be whatever. And if it's wireless, then we can assume that this switch right here will have some sort of wireless adapter on it to be able to receive that wireless signal. So now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of actually how to set up that session monitor. And we know that we have, let's go into the physical layout of how this thing looks and zoom in a little bit. Ports 1 through 4, these 4 up here, these 4 ports right here are actually used right now for those devices at home. This port right here that my mouse is over, gig port 1, is going to our router. Well, we're going to be using gig port 0 to send to a device that can actually listen to all this traffic that's being copied. Because everything that comes over all those home devices in ports 1 through 4, these 4 over here, is going to be copied to and from that port and the gig port 1 going to the router and outputted on gig port 2 so we can listen to it. So now in our switch, we're going to go into the CLI and make sure we're in enable mode first. And then we're going to go and say config T, because we are configuring the terminal of the switch. That's what the T stands for, terminal. Now, once we're actually in our config, we're going to type in monitor session 1. And at this case, we can determine a source. So our source, which is in the same command line, is going to be, let's say, VLAN 1. Now, that's not necessarily determining an individual port, but what it's doing is everything over VLAN 1 is going to be monitored. We know that we are defaulted VLAN 1 on this particular switch, so those 4 end devices are going to be monitored as the source. And it also helps if I can spell correctly too. This is a bad habit of being able to hunt and peck on the keyboard. But now that we have that in, our next command is going to be, where's the destination? Where is all this traffic going? Well, in this case, we're going to say monitor session, and I'm going to spell it correctly on this one, I promise. And we're going to say destination, and we're going to say interface gig 02. And that's that second gigabit Ethernet port that we have on the far right that it's going to send everything to. So everything that's going back and forth over VLAN 1 is going to be copied and sent over to that second interface on the gig side. Now that we have that, one thing I do want to point out before we go look at the config itself is this number 1 right here. We can set up different types of session monitors. This is monitor session 1. We can set up 2, 3, 4, 5, however we want to do it. Now we can also identify individual interfaces in the source like we did for the destination. So if we wanted to say monitor session 1 source interface, fast Ethernet 01, which is our server, we could do that. Or we could do it by VLANs, or we can add in multiple different sources on there in that session too. But this is just a very simplistic view of what's actually going on behind the scenes. Now, how do we see what's going on here? Well, let's hit exit. And it brings us back to our regular enable prompt and do a show run. And if we scroll down all the way to the bottom, we can see right here that is our monitor session commands. So we have a source of VLAN 1 with a destination of interface gig 02. Now, we know that all traffic is going to be copied and sent to gig 02 now. So there's a couple of things that we need to prep in order for the device on gig 02 to be able to see it. And primarily, it's making sure that whatever device is on there, let's say our Kali box, if we go back to the Wireshark video and take a look, we need to set that interface to promiscuous mode. So now that these two are set for the session monitor, we're going to close this and simulate. Going back to our end devices, we're going to get a PC and drag it right here. And we're going to get a connection and plug it into our switch at gig 02, where our destination is, and drag it over to the PC in fast Ethernet 0 for that PC. Now, this is the kind of setup we're talking about here when I was mentioning it in the Wireshark video, is that how we monitor everything going in and out. So if the router is our modem/router going to the internet, and all these devices on the far right are set up to be able to do regular communication, then this PC right here in the middle, set up for the monitor session configuration inside the switch, is going to see everything going back and forth. Now, this all determines based on the actual interface, source destination configuration, how we have things set up on the VLAN, etc., etc. But we're just taking a very basic look at how to set this up. And then in the next few videos, when we take a look at our Kali box and we're using the Wireshark on that promiscuous mode, that's where this comes into play at, and how we actually see the traffic going back and forth over a network connection. This, we're also assuming that the router on the far left is at our perimeter, and that's the only point of the network where we actually go to the rest of the internet. Just different things to keep in mind. But hey, if you like this one and want to know more, leave a comment below, like the video, share it with your friends. We want to be able to push out the word of networking, cybersecurity, and even the basics of intro to digital forensics from Panola College out to everybody on the interwebs. I am Eric, and I really do appreciate all y'all taking your time to be able to watch these videos. It means a lot to me that people are actually liking them. And if you want to see anything else, let me know.